Welcome to the second season of the Horizon Room. We are in episode 4 of what is a really fun time. I'm going to be jumping back and forth between sharing screen and not sharing screen. So if you have any sort of propensity for seasickness at all, be warned, because there may be shifting screens. Can everybody see my screen now at this point? Okay, perfect. So today we're really talking about an interesting topic that is near and dear to my heart. It's on the agenda for a lot of systems out there. A lot of the school systems that I talk to on a daily basis are really starting to think through. We've innovated, we've done some things. What do we do in terms of looking for outcomes? What are the look fors? And how do we plan explicitly for that? Because it really needs to be planned forward and done in a way that is sustainable and replicable. Wow. Yeah, it's not even Wednesday. So the Horizon Room, this is going to be our open time for talking. It's an important time for us to make sure that we're sharing learning, we're advancing ideas, and the two gentlemen that are joining me today are both adept at that, and I'm going to stop sharing because I want you to see their faces a little bit more clearly. But with me today is Anthony Paternos. He's with the Osseo school system in Minnesota, and Roy Darrington is in Utah. Would you give just a quick intro, take a few seconds to share with people what are you doing, where are you in the system, and where are you in your work, just very quickly. Anthony, could you kick that off for us?
Yeah, certainly. Greetings, everyone. Anthony Paternos. I'm the Executive Director of Technology for Osseo Area Schools. So we're a suburban school district kind of on the northwest corner of the Minneapolis-St. Paul metropolitan area. And for Minnesota standards, we are the 5th largest school district in the state of Minnesota. We have a large geographic swath that covers a lot of different communities. So we have about 6 different individual cities within our suburban area school district, which creates a lot of unique diversity for us to engage with and how we navigate education within our system. We have just under 21,000 students. Student population is 60% BIPOC population, 40% white students, Caucasian students. We have about 50% students receiving free and reduced price lunch on a socioeconomic scale. We also have a significant multilingual learner population, roughly about 30% of our students, and then we've got about a 20% special education population as well. So we have got a lot of amazing opportunities and diversity within our system that allows us to really think about how do we meet the needs in each and every scholar that walks through our doors to be successful for the future that's coming. Journey-wise, when we think about looking at our school system, we've been engaging in digital learning and access to technology devices for students for over 10 years now in our system. The pandemic has created a lot of additional opportunity and new thinking within our system on how we move forward, and really amplifying some of the work we started engaging with prior to the pandemic around just this shifting of what is modern education and what can it be and could it be as we move forward as a system, really preparing for the future of our society.
Cool. Thanks. Yeah, I've got a couple of questions, in fact, that I want to follow up on with that one. But I'm going to jump over to Roy real quick. Quick introduction, Roy.
Yeah, Roy Darrington, Assistant Superintendent, Juab School District. We are a rural school district, 2,800 students. We're smack dab in the middle of Utah, about an hour south of Salt Lake City for reference. Our district is really a district that's chosen probably 10, 12 years ago. We made a very intentional decision as a district to pursue kind of personalizing education for students and really changing making everything variables except for learning. Learning's the non-negotiable. Everything else that are traditional non-negotiables, we've kind of thrown to the wind and said we can work on those. We've really tried to push forward in this idea of meeting each student where they're at and helping them to reach their definition of success. And that's I think maybe a part of this discussion a little bit later today, but really changing the one size fits all definition of what outcomes are or what success is for a student or a family in the educational system, and really trying to be flexible and nimble enough to recognize that every student and parent has a different definition of what success is. And so how do we maximize student potential by creating a diverse environment of opportunity that allows each student and every student to get where they want to go.
So for those of you watching and joining us, I know that we've got folks popping in here and there. These two individuals were chosen because of the journey that they've led and that they've experienced in their own systems. And for both of these systems, Osseo and Juab, to be 10 plus years in is great. And one of the reasons that we have the topic that we have today is because we have a lot of systems that were forced into innovation, right? They're forced to think differently. They're forced to act differently. They're being asked to do things in a new way. They're shifting away from traditional. And one thing that we come up with a lot is, how do you go from something that is very traditional to something that is not? And so for you to say that you threw traditional markers out the window to the wind, right, is horrifying for some people. And it really, it causes lots of sleep. It really does. It's kind of it's sometimes, in a lot of instances, one of those things that people hold in the distance and they go, wow, that's so shiny and nice. And I would love to go do that, but I can't start with that. I don't even know where to begin. I don't know where to begin because it gets so huge, right? It gets gigantic. The scope of this just becomes huge. And so what I want to try to break down a little bit for folks today and come away from the day with is some knowledge of how to get started, some experiences that you've had in the very beginning. When somebody talks to either of you, and I'm sure that we're going to have follow-ups because I always do, they always say, that's great. They're 10 years in. Of course, they're 10 years in. It's going to look great. They're going to be able to talk about successes and metrics and all the things, right? And who am I? I'm back here in the knuckle dragging stages of that transition. But what I also see is that there's definite stages and progressions or developmental stages that systems go through. And on the surface, you would go, wow, that's unique to those three districts in their context. But in reality, when you take sort of the aggregate view, most of the steps are fairly similar. And it's not that they're formulaic, but there's certain things that successful systems do and ways that they think that helps them to move forward in a much more mindful way. So I want to start there. I want to start with, where do you start, and where did you start when you made the decision? And Roy, I can start with you, because where did you start? You said you made a conscious decision to do things differently. How did that happen? And what was like step number one? How did you jump out the door with that?
Well, yeah, so I think for me, I was recruited into the district. So I came in to bring a catalyst to this work, if I can say it that way.
Yep, sure.
I had a certain skill set that was actively recruited to meet a desire that existed within the current leadership of the district. They brought me in as a high school principal, and then as you know, most school systems will say, well, our elementary programs tend to be really good at this, but we can't get secondary to do anything. And we went just the opposite. So we started where I was at, and really it and I'm going to try to really oversimplify this, but to answer your question, the first step is simply a belief that we are here for students and we are not here for the system. And that's huge because we all work within a monster that has institutional norms that have been established for centuries. And we all went through it. Our parents all went through it. Everyone is an expert at public education. They have 12 plus years of experience of what it should be, an expectation and what was forced on them. But we also have 100 years of that system failing a large number of students. And we openly admit and can identify those failures, but yet we try to change everything but the system itself, because we come back to these same institutionalized barriers that we created internally. And we just propagate now over and over again. And so starting the question and ending every question with what's best for students. And then speaking, it's not good enough to just be best for students, because then I can play the average game. Well, statistically speaking, it's best if I do what the institution's already done for most students. Yeah, but the other 45 to 50%, it really wasn't the best. And we didn't even do the best for the students that we thought we did. They just survived. They just survived. They didn't thrive in the system. So changing that even one step further and saying, what is best for each student? If I was to put Johnny in front of the whole school and say, here's Johnny, and we all know who Johnny is. We're really good at identifying students. We know their needs. We know their barriers. We know their the components of trauma and being at risk and all those things we can identify. We identify them readily. And when we put Johnny on the pedestal and everybody brings their expertise and resources together, all of a sudden the outcomes or the structure that we create for Johnny is magical. And it's really good for Johnny. And then we say, well, why can't we do that for every student? And then the institution jumps in and just throws its whole weight in front of us and say, wait. And so for me, it might be an oversimplification, but believing that statement and then throwing your whole, like everything that you put into the job, into this idea that each student deserves their best education, and we can change policies so we can ensure or be flexible enough or nimble enough to meet each student's needs and their parents' needs, then that really changes the work and makes the work a lot easier. And it's really easy to sell. But you have to be willing to sell it, and you have to know it, and you have to go to the big players. You have to find policymakers. I've had the governor, the lieutenant governor, every legislator in the state of Utah, every member of the state school board, national leaders. I've had the Department of Education from Washington, D.C. in my school. I've been in their offices and say, tell me I'm wrong. You tell me face to face that your policy is more important than Johnny, that you're already telling me we need to do something different. We need to do something different. We need to do something different. And they'll agree with you 100%. Now, the hard part is getting creative minds together of how do you flex policies? How do you remove certain policies? How do you recreate space? And that gets at, which luckily for me, I came from a space, a lot of my doctoral work was in policy. And so getting to the heart of what are policies and how and why do we have policies? And when you focus on the purpose of policy, you often find that most of our policies are horrible. They don't match purpose. And so then you can start stripping down, but somebody has to be willing to champion that and take those fights on. I don't know. That's a long answer to a short.
No, it's great. And I love that you started with something simple because often, you do hear people and you hear administrators and teachers say, oh, it's all about the kids. And in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, is it really though? Is it really? Are you backing that up with actions, or are you just saying it? And people pay a lot of lip service to that. I mean, I'll run down that rabbit hole, but I want to get to Anthony with that same question. Where do you start? What's ground zero for you?
Yeah, well, I gotta first say the first thing that triggered my mind as I'm listening here is Einstein's definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and expecting different results. And whether we put technology in front of that, or we put new furniture or new physical spaces, oftentimes we still see a replication of the same thing, just repackaged with a new piece of wrapping paper around it. And that's leads into a little bit of me thinking of the journey that we've gone through in Osseo area schools. We were in this really great space 10 years ago where we had funding resources coming in towards technology, and seeing that getting students the access to technology to reduce those barriers and the opportunity that internet and internet connected technologies was going to bring. There was vision and foresight around that. But all the emphasis and the focus was on how do we remove the barrier of the access to technology rather than thinking about instructional design, where I came into the system just a little over 6 years ago. And when I stepped in, it was a great opportunity because foundationally the resources were there. And I think for every district, you've got to go through different stages of process of understanding what it means to move into this digital space, or to have the resources as we think about next generation classroom spaces or whatever that looks like. Those foundational resource structures need to be there in order to have that facilitated conversation of, okay, now there's no barriers. Why are we still teaching and instructing in the way that we are? Because students can show up and engage differently and learn differently now. And there's not a technology or a physical resource barrier from that occurring. It is our own limitations that we're putting on ourselves as a system. We started just about 7 years ago, where we revamped our digital learning plan at the time, which was very heavily, as I kind of mentioned here, resource-based, and stepped back and brought instructional leaders, teachers, business community in for a facilitated conversation of, pull all the technology aside, pull all the physical spaces aside. What do we want for the learning experience of our students? And having a deep conversation around setting a vision around the learning environment and that instructional space we want to create. And out of that came a revamped plan, which has very limited conversation about technology in it at all. It's about creating opportunities for students to learn in what we call path, place, and pace in our organization. So how do we create that flexibility, the opportunity for students to have voice and choice in their learning? And then how do we back that up with the technology or the physical resources to support those learning environments that we want to have in place? It's that recognition that as a system, we all start somewhere. And I always go back to the SAMR model a little bit. We all kind of start with the substitution phase. And as I've engaged with some districts where one-to-one technologies are kind of a new thing coming out of the pandemic, a lot of them are they're living in that substitution space, which is okay. Teachers got to get familiar with that. But then it's how do we as leadership and from a vision standpoint push the system to get into that thinking about modification and redefinition? How do we create learning experiences now that are modular so students can show up where they're at and progress through the learning as they need and spark find the passions that they have and attach that or connect that to the learning standards that are happening in the space. So that really set us up for a really good opportunity leading into what I called digital learning immersion for teachers in the pandemic space, because the resources were there and teachers then got forced into a space where they really had to think differently. And coming out of the pandemic, we've had some great opportunities of really thinking about instructional space design and configurations of learning environments. We stood up our virtual K-12 full-time online school, which we have 600 students K through 12 engaging in that learning space because that works for them. And they're running a really creative, innovative schedule in there where, Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday is more of your traditional kind of learning schedule. And Wednesday is this flex kind of learning space day where students connect with passions they have and work on passion projects, almost that 20% time concept. The upper level peer students in our senior high in the online program are able to connect with elementary students to do some peer tutoring concepts within that space. It's a really cool, innovative thing that we have kind of this prototype, even though it's in an online space, that we can now take concepts out of and look at how can we replicate these opportunities within our in-person, face-to-face school sites. So that's kind of the journey that we're on. And I, related as I, engaged as a classroom teacher when I first got devices in my classroom with students, the SAMR model really plays out to be true. I got it. And at first I was just taking that worksheet and I digitized it. Well, that's not really enriching and engaging. It's just redoing the same thing I'm doing, just repackaged. And it's when I really started getting into thinking about flipped instructional models and students being able to have kind of a flex learning space within my classroom space that, new innovations, different thinking kind of came to fruition as a teacher. And it took some time to get through that. And I think as a system, you have to recognize and be okay with, we're going to start somewhere, but from a leadership perspective, how do we push that vision to really think about redefinition with the learning experience that we're creating?
So it's fascinating. I jotted down a couple of things, and one of those is catalyst. And so both of you entered into your systems as a catalyst, and I think that's critical in moving work forward and getting. There's a certain amount of energy that comes with a catalyst, right? And whether you're talking about a chemical reaction or an interpersonal reaction, the energy that is required to lift a system from a place to another place is sometimes greater in certain systems. And so you can a teacher could be a catalyst, right? But the teacher's catalytic energy is relatively limited. Sometimes it takes an external person coming in with a fresh perspective to bring a higher level of catalytic energy. And that's fascinating because you often hear, well, we've got our own, we grow our own, we look internally, we bring people up, we do all those things. And that's fantastic. I love that we're up with people. But at a certain point, you have to actually have a catalyst. You have to have somebody who's going to say, we're going to do something different, and here's why. And that's fascinating. And so thinking about that, what would you say to, because since you both experienced it firsthand, what would you say to a system that maybe believes they can just do it themselves, and maybe they can just pull from minds that they have in-house and get this thing rolling? Because in my mind, if they wanted to do that, why didn't they do it already? And if that was possible, why would it need to be a catalytic moment? Roy, do you want to think on that?
Yeah, so I actually 100% believe that every school district in the nation has people that are capable of doing this work and capable of solving problems in new and unique ways that others haven't even put in place. I don't think that a catalyst is required in the sense of an external catalyst. I think that permission needs to be granted. I think that great minds need permission to be innovative themselves. And we talk about innovation as a target, but that has to have an environment to grow and thrive in. And so I think just changing, again, coming back to the why or the belief, we spent 3-4 years really just focusing to make sure that everybody understood this is what we're trying to do. And we never said, this is how you do it. We never said that once. Mm-hmm. Nothing we did was, you will do it this way. What we posed were questions of, how could you create this environment? I know that you're familiar, Chris, obviously with Utah. We have the PCBL framework, Personalized Competency-Based Learning Framework in Utah. that has been adopted largely, well, almost 100% on the back of the work that we've done as a district to kind of grow that into something that other people are thriving for. And a simple example is if you take those basic principles from Patrick and Levine, and you just say to teachers, how do you create this environment in your classroom? What can you do? They have an abundance of strategy skills, and when they run up to the issue of resources are a barrier, that's where we can step in and we can support them, but give them space. Celebrate failure. You have to openly celebrate failure. And when I say we threw traditional markers out the window, you don't hear us talk about end of level test scores. We don't talk about high stakes testing because the second no matter what you say, the second you come back to it and say, and your value as a teacher or in a classroom is this is what we report out, you've just basically nullified everything you've tried to do. And nobody says we want our student to go to school and get really high scores on an end of level. They want to be loved. They want to be taken care of. They want their needs met. They want to be secure. They want their mental health taken care of. They want to know there's people there that care about them. Well, how do we celebrate that? And to do that, teachers have to fail and fail often, but fail forward. And we have to be there to encourage that, nurture that, foster that, and then keep gently pushing that constant and consistent soft pressure that moves the system forward. But we're moving forward to a common understanding or why. And so I think in any system, if leadership simply changes the focus of what they really, to really match what they want as outcomes, and then give the green light and support to people that are willing to investigate, you don't need anyone from the outside. We have great problem solvers in every district in this nation.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and I'm also curious about some of the feedback that I get from folks as I listen to them, and what I start to put together is what you just described was artful, and there's an art in doing that. Right. And I think that everybody has an opportunity to do that. Where I see some folks sort of tripping is I don't know either. I don't have the confidence that I can do that, that I can lead the system through those steps, or I haven't actually experienced it. So I don't know what it looks like and feels like. And so sometimes there's a little bit of a barrier in that, because you might have really great intentions internally and your team might be great, but when you say we're going to go down this path and you lead the hearts and minds, sometimes there's a gap there. Sometimes there's a gap where the leadership may not know how to lead hearts and minds, and that's hard, because then I say, well, great. Well, here's some tips. Here's 5 things that you can look at. Is there a book that you can read? Is there a checklist? Could I just use a checklist and then I'm going to go down that list and it's going to be great? And that just doesn't, right? It doesn't work that way. It just doesn't. And so that's a curiosity for me. Anthony, what do you think about that?
Yeah, and as I'm thinking through that and reflecting on that, as I look at my leadership role and the size of our system, there's this tendency to want to have super tight controls that follow a certain path, and kind of leaning on that lens of permission, especially as a system leader. It's okay that one school site doesn't look exactly the same as another school site. And that's, I think, part of the permission that's in there, and why it's hard to have, a checklist. That's a great place to start and to start conversation. But every school community is unique. It has a unique group of learners with different needs. And that that community of learners changes from years to year as we get new students in, other students out. You have a community population that lives around there, that demographics change, or age of who's living in that community changes. And, the opportunity that exists with our education system is to continue to partner and innovate within the space of the needs within the communities that we serve. And I see this, where you see a lot of the consistency is typically within smaller school systems that are serving a smaller tight community. And as I engage with a school district that serves 6 different communities, one side of our community is very different from the other side of the community. And helping to foster and build leadership capacity to engage with the teaching staff, giving teaching staff permission to engage in conversation and to listen, but extending that into the student community and the parent community. What do you need from that learning environment? And then how do we problem solve innovative solutions that's going to support our learning community to be successful? And it's hard as educators to live in a space where you might have failure. We want to do well. We want to do right by all of our students. There's urgency in our work when we see the challenges that we're facing. And part of the innovation process and the change process is, there's going to be some failure, and that's a learning opportunity. And that's something that, as a teacher, I tried to instill in my students that, sometimes as a math student, you're going to fail at the problem, and that's okay. It's a learning opportunity for us to grow and excel and to get better with. And so, creating that culture around innovation and that failure can lead to success is critical for setting the foundation for, setting up any checklists or protocols or any literature that you're going to read out there, because there's a culture piece that needs to change, that needs to happen first before you can embrace any of the real lasting change that's going to come out of, the work.
And I can see people nodding their heads virtually here, when you say culture. And we know that, right? I mean, there's T-shirts that say stuff about culture, eating whatever. It escapes me because I don't own one of those T-shirts. And so that's fantastic. And yet, in the back of my mind, I'm hearing some administrators that I know who nod at that, and yet, how do you help them to move forward? Like if you've both got to sit down elbow to elbow and knee to knee with somebody and coach them in this artful leadership move, what would you say? What would you say to someone who is struggling with that, right? What would you say to them?
Having worked with a number of administrators from across the country in different districts, what's one thing? What's one thing that you can do? Let's start with that. We'll identify something you believe. Don't worry about the things you don't believe you can do right now. Let's start with the one thing that you believe you can do. And again, that comes secondary to purpose. And I often talk to people about purpose first, practice second, protocols third. And we don't do them in any other order. You can't, to the statement made earlier, checklist, the protocols can't drive the purpose.
Mm-hmm.
That just doesn't work. And so first, we're going to really make sure that person truly believes, that leader truly believes to some level that things can change, that they can be impactful, that they can lead. We're not, and everybody will come at that. Some believe that, yeah, I got this, and they're gone, our thoroughbreds. But this might be one of our asses. And everybody knows you have to stroke your thoroughbreds, beat your asses. That's just how sometimes it works in leadership.
I'm going to make a T-shirt with that.
Yeah, leaders themselves fall into that same category. We have thoroughbreds and we have the others. And so but anyone leading has to believe they can lead. So what is your purpose? And then pick one thing that you truly believe you can do. One thing. It can be the most simple thing, and then set them up for success. Set them up, coach them, mentor them, support them, let them move through it. And then you ask, what is the next thing? And while pretty soon you start building momentum, and this is leadership 101. So anyone that's been through leadership, this isn't rocket science,
Right.
but it really is that simple. And then helping to support them. Finding one big thing that I know has helped in a lot of areas is building a network of like-minded people, kind of like this group here. When you bring people that can kind of reinvigorate or validate what you're doing, that helps. And that helps to reassure you that what you're doing is right. And because you will run into those that don't recognize, don't want to change. I mean, all those don'ts.
Yep.
And you have to be willing to take them on. And we all would like to take them on through helping coach all of them to their own internal change to pursue something different. But sometimes it does come down to, it has to be a positional power type thing. That's always the last answer to anything.
Sure.
And in my opinion, you basically have failed if you've got to that point.
Right.
But coaching that change through little incremental steps. And if you can't dream them up yourself, find somebody to mentor you, to coach you, that can help you get those small incremental successes. Don't be, independent in the sense that you believe that you're isolated. Because if you go put yourself on an island, you're working on an island by your own choice.
Yeah.
And there's plenty of work, there's plenty of support out there. I mean, I've watched that over the last 20 years in this work that I've been engaging in this kind of effort. We are nowhere where we were 20 years ago. Today, more are pursuing kind of a change to education than are not. And so there's lots of like-minded people with interest, and there's a lot of external factors that are pushing on systems to change. So there's a lot of support out there. Go find it. Find someone who can take you under their wing, someone who will mentor you, and just move one incremental step. Anyone can do that.
And there's some vulnerability that goes along with that, because you do have to acknowledge that it isn't you, and it never is you.
Right.
It's not about you.
Well, and we, in our district, we readily profess and proclaim everyone's a coach and everyone's coachable.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter if you're the superintendent or you're a janitor. And not to put those on polar opposites, because that's not my intention, but regardless of your role in the district, everyone takes feedback and everyone's capable of providing feedback.
Yeah, and that's great. That's the kind of culture to be in, and that's super healthy. Anthony, thoughts on advices for those folks who are maybe struggling with some of those leadership moves?
I think Roy summed it up really well as a good initial step. But one of the things that I think about in particular when we're having these conversations about innovative learning design, we're at a space now where we're really trying to push the boundaries of what can be, and there isn't necessarily a lot of tried and true research out there yet. There's emerging research and evolving research, but it's not like the 100-year history that we have of how our schools are currently operating. And so, one of the things in the realm of, giving permission to fail, as a leader, you gotta recognize, and it is okay to not have all the answers as you're stepping into this space. And it is okay to tell your staff, I don't know, but as we come across and we experience this, we're going to collaboratively problem solve this together. And as you're stepping into leading a change, it's for me, it's really pertinent to understand the staff or the team that you're working with, and identify who are your allies and who are your, I don't want to necessarily say naysayers, because everyone can be converted, but who might be those that are a little more resistant to the change,
Hmm.
and make sure you're leveraging your allies in your system to help, carry the vision with you. So you're not having to do that on all alone, and make sure you're finding time to sit down and include those that are more resistant in your process in the conversation, to understand why is this change challenging for them, and what barriers am I not seeing with my lens as a leader, or my superstar teacher that's running with this, that I need to incorporate into the perspective as I look at how we navigate the road to the change that we're making within our school site, within our district, within our grade level team.
Yeah, that's great. I think the listening portion of that is super critical. You mentioned barriers, and what I want to jump to next is a question that sort of a detail question, because it's important that we start to give. I want to make sure that our folks that are listening and looking for those bits of the kernels of truth that they can take forward. And I know that some of the questions that I get are about the stages, and what would you be looking for in terms of when do you know you're making progress? And I think it comes from a place of, I'm so close to the work that I feel like we're not getting anywhere. And so in my mind, I think, okay, well, what metrics had you planned forward with? And maybe they did and maybe they didn't, but looking back on your process, were there specific points where you stepped back a bit and went, okay, so that's significant, and that place where we are right now is significant in our progression. Can you identify sort of milestones that you would look for that could be tied to outcomes that you had planned? Roy, did you have any of those?
Yeah, I was just throwing in the chat kind of some of my thoughts on that. One of the things that we default to, and we're our own worst enemy of this, and it does come back. I don't want to beat a dead horse, but that definition of success. When we say what is success in education, there is a natural default that everybody assumes: test scores, student outcomes. Well, we say student outcomes, but even student outcomes, if we're not clear about defining what outcomes, we default right back to where we started, which is test scores. But yet test scores is an unwinnable battle. We've been chasing that finish line forever. And we can say that all students can learn, and all students can learn at high levels, which I 100% believe in, but not all students can learn, and not all students can learn at high levels within the structures that we currently have existing. And we can beat ourselves to death trying to change that, but those two definitions will never go together. They never will. So we've set ourselves up for failure. We've set teachers up for failure. We've set students up for failure. And in the end, the system for failure. And so the first thing that I will always say is redefine success, or rather even define success and do it very clearly. What are the things that your community values? What are the universal truths that most everyone wants to see out of a school, public K-12 school system? For us, that was the work of going to our community and saying, what is our profile of a learner? What is our portrait of a graduate? And that really came out saying, look, we do value academics, and you should. Academics are one of our main purposes. But it's a very small purpose in today's world for our kids, because we don't need our kids to know stuff. We need our kids to be wise. How do they use that information? And so kind of marrying that blend of the humanity with the academic. So things like grit, resilience, honesty, determination, self-awareness, things that will make them better people, universally make them better people. Our communities, your communities, everyone's community will come out and say about the same things. And if you don't believe that, go to Profile of a Graduate website and look at the thousands of examples of portraits or profiles of learners, and they're almost all the same. Developed independently in thousands of communities across this country and the world, for that matter. And so when you say, okay, this is what people really value, you can now redefine this is what success looks like. So then you can take a step back and say, okay, how do we set ourselves up to be as successful in meeting those metrics as we can? And let's take honesty. Is honesty really a metric that we should be measuring? No, probably not. Is it one that would be almost impossible to measure? Yes. But can we start looking at things like, what are we doing in our system that we can guarantee our parents we're working on helping their students develop that disposition of honesty? So you look at inputs rather than outputs. We've all understood the factory model that created education, and you got inputs, you got throughputs, and you got outputs. And the system was set up, which we say is the factory model, but what factory takes completely heterogeneous inputs, runs them through the exact same input or throughput, and expects a uniform output, or even an output with a certain level of expectation that is a proficient output? None. That will never work. Instead of saying, look, we have a system that has heterogeneous inputs, we can create a flexible input, and our outputs are now heterogeneous as well, as far as meeting the needs of what the individual learners wanted. But then we can also have some barriers that say, these are our non-negotiables, which is our profile of the learner. We will ensure that every student is exposed to lessons about what determination, grit, resilience means. In our district, this is how we've chose to define it. This is what it will look like. This is where we'll implement it. This is how teachers bring it into the classroom. This is why it's important. Those things we can control. Guess what? Every teacher can guarantee their own success if the metric is, show me where you implemented that in your classroom. The teacher controls that 100%. So I have set that teacher up for success or failure simply on the teacher's merits alone and efforts, not on any of the external factors that we all know exist in education. Mm-hmm. So again, a long answer to a short question, but the idea is change the definition of success, set yourself up so you can be successful, meaning you being your students can be successful, your teachers can be successful, your administrators can be successful, which by default, the whole school is successful, which then by default, the whole district will be successful. And those are things you can control. Those are all within your tangible control. And everybody wants, Anthony talked about this, everyone wants to be successful, especially teachers. Mm-hmm. They're ultra compliant. They want to be successful. So set them up for success. That builds that energy, that momentum that you need. And it also starts to change the definition and put on display what really matters in your schools, which now matches what your community really values.
So that cohesion is often overlooked or maybe discounted, I think, in systems. And to listen to you both, it sounds so easy. I'm like, well, sweet, okay, let's do it. Done. Excellent. So how come we're not a little further? But I know that it's complex and it's dauntingly complex for some folks. And I'm going to take us down a different path, but I want to hear from Anthony. What are you thinking about in terms of outcomes when you're planning forward in your system? What are you looking at? What are you looking for?
Yeah, so we have a strong culture around we need to have measurable outcomes for whatever we're doing as a system. And it's not necessarily means test scores, but if we're going to try something out, how do we know it's successful? So defining that criteria of success. So as we did our revamp and jumpstart and really refocused and defined, how we are moving forward around changing the learning environment around path, place, and pace, we took time as a system to define what does that mean for us? What do each of those pillars of what we're trying to do mean? And then we kind of worked with leadership teams of, now, if you walk into a classroom and you're doing classroom observations, we use the Danielson rubric. What are the look-fors that align for this? Where does this show up in the Danielson rubric? If you see students engaging with technology, how are they using the technology? Just because they got the Chromebook open and they're in the classroom and you've got a teacher doing a lesson doesn't mean that the teacher is really amplifying path, place, and pace and voice and choice for students in that classroom. So really working with the leadership team to kind of define, what is, as was mentioned, that success criteria, and what would you actually see when you walk into a learning space? And then working with our teachers of, here's what success would look like if you're truly implementing the strategies we're talking about and creating the environment that we want. We're very fortunate that we have a robust research and assessment team in-house, and we do regular ongoing in-house assessment. So, we have a study that we call the Promising Practices Study that we do on a biannual basis that we aligned to looking around path, place, and pace. And we're able to identify and gather evidence of teachers who were successfully implementing the vision around path, place, and pace were having better outcomes in their classrooms with academic success versus staff who were not. We didn't focus on the academic success. We focused on how do we measure results and creating the environment we wanted, with the understanding that should we be doing this accurately, the academics are going to follow behind that, because the teachers, they're content experts. They know their subject matter. So how do we support them in creating new learning pathways for students that makes it relevant for them and in a way that's engaging to the student to show up as their authentic selves in that learning space? Will lead to the transferred academics that we want to see happen within that place as well. We also deployed another tool called it's by Filter Ed, a tech consulting company. They've got a tool similar to Bright Bites that you might have heard out in the market as well, where we've been measuring kind of ongoing progress in a multitude of areas between our parents, students, and staff. That's another metric to reinforce and identify how is our vision around what we're trying to create in this new learning environment actually being amplified or not, and where might we need to focus different attention and resources as we move forward. But defining that success up front is critical in kind of measuring that along the way so you can pivot and shift. I mean, you're in an innovation model. You don't necessarily know the path, but if you can see that you're not getting the results you wanted, you got to make a shift rather than continuing down the same road that's not getting you to where you want to be.
Sure. Again, our definition of insanity. So what I find fascinating as I listen is that you're describing the thing that we expect teachers to do with kids, right? We have this well-crafted plan. We jump into the middle of things, and if our learners aren't learning, we're paying attention, right? That's job number one, is learn the learner. And we should be able to pivot and shift and move. And that's fascinating. It came up in a couple of other Horizon Room conversations. The significant alignment between all of the actions within a school system is not accidental, but sometimes I think it's overlooked or maybe it's forgotten about. So I know that we're running a little bit out close to our time, and I want to make sure that I get to the last question. And so what I'm going to ask you to do is think for a minute. And I'm looking for your top 3 elements of a sustainable plan. If you're going to jump into a brand new system and you're going to say, all right, cool, well, we're going to take this system from point A to point B, what would the top 3 elements of that plan be in your mind? And I know that I just put you on the spot with that one, but I know that you're both adept at creating these plans. So I'll jump to Roy first. What do you think? Top 3?
Wow. Top 3. Obviously, one I think I've beat to death is vision. And you have to have a clear vision of where you want to go, not necessarily the pathway, but at least some idea of the destination. I think you need to, I don't know how to say this, rally the troops around you that will help you. So build a team, build a team that will be capable of helping lead this charge and put it to work. If it's all leadership, you're in the wrong spot. You're looking at the wrong people.
Right.
And then third, yeah, I got a million ideas going through my
Right.
head. Sorry.
That's
I
okay.
know that it's important. It's really important to make sure that you don't give up on yourself.
Yeah.
So be nimble.
Hmm.
Don't be so bullheaded, because you can be your own worst enemy.
Hmm.
You know, you have to be honest at taking feedback and assessing and self-assessing
Hmm.
and being nimble to the process, and the process has to be flexible. If you think you have it figured out, like I know how to get from A to Z, I can tell you, you are going to fail.
Yep.
You were wrong.
Yep.
You were wrong.
Yeah.
Even if you've done it a million times, because there's so many external factors. So be nimble.
Yeah, that's great, and I love the nod to vulnerability and flexibility, because you're so right. There isn't a path, right? We see where we want to go, and we set what we think is going to be the path, but we're a couple of steps ahead, maybe, or a half step ahead, or maybe we're no steps ahead, and that's okay, and it has to be okay. That's great. Thanks for that, Anthony. Top three. What do you think?
And this is tough, and there's going to be some parallels here.
It's okay.
But the first thing that came to mind is definitely, having that clear articulated vision. And I think within that vision space is that definition of success, like we've talked about, so that the organization or the team that you're working with knows where we're going. And then I think along with that, as you're on that journey, and in order to achieve that vision, especially as we're in this new space, it's really, thinking of this lens of culture and building the culture within the team and the organization. And, kind of the key components in that culture to me is, as we've mentioned already, that permission to fail. You need to have the safety nets in place when you do fail, so you can pick up and move forward. But we're going to be trying some new things and innovating in some new spaces that the road isn't defined, and that's okay. And with that kind of leads into what our current K-12 system isn't really structured and hasn't really been designed around is nimbleness and agility. And that clearly was demonstrated with the challenges we were trying to navigate through the pandemic of this is really about agility as a system, and how to be nimble and change on the fly, and how do we keep that space and that culture and look at that as something to embrace as we move forward versus this is a hindrance to us being successful. And the last one I would say is partnership. I think, whether you're in a leadership role or even a teacher who's just trying to do some really amazing creative things that, even has an administration saying, you're doing great, do it. It can get to a feeling of isolation, and you need to know you're not alone. And there's a lot of opportunity for partnership and collaboration, even if it's not in your school space. Might be in other schools within your district, or other school districts within your community or state. But look for that opportunity to partner and bring new ideas in and help lead the charge together versus in isolation and on a lone path.
I love that you bring up partnership, because that's very often when I talk to a principal, for example. Being a principal is three jobs in one, as we all know, and invariably life happens, and your best laid plans for getting into classrooms once a day just doesn't happen, right? You end up down in the office with whatever's going on, and so for those of us who are on the outside of that, you're like, okay, well, we got to set up your schedule and block time and all those things, and all that's great. But if you're not explicit about doing the things that matter most, then they're just not going to happen. And so that's often a challenge. It's great for us to hang around and talk about, let's go do these things. And yet I know in the back of my mind, there's a principal that I'm going to talk to on Thursday who's going to say, that's great, but I can't do that. I can't. And so then I have to think about the system and how the system supporting that person to be successful. So I know that we're out of time. I have 1 minute to wrap up. I want to say thank you to Roy and Anthony very much for your contribution. I've got some things popping into my inbox here that I'm going to need to get back to, and I know that there are some questions coming, and I know that these two individuals, for those of you listening, make sure that you take note of them, and for sure, in the interest of that last comment about partnership, reach out to these guys, because they have experience and they can lend an ear. They can be a thought partner. They can share ideas. They can connect you with other people, much in the same way that the Learning Council or I can. So we're going to wrap up today from the Horizon Room. I'm going to share a screen because I want to make sure that you get a sense of what our next topic is going to be. Can everybody see that? So our next topic is actually going to be following today's topic, and it is defining a vision for learning that doesn't require a crystal ball, right? It isn't about a crystal ball. As we learned today from these two gentlemen, a lot of it is about listening and paying attention and setting that vision for what you want the experience to be, and then creating your system in order to go do that. So I'm going to sign off from the Horizon Room. June 14 is our next date. We've got a panel of experts again. Again, thank you, Anthony and Roy. Always a pleasure to share a brain space with you. Signing off from the Horizon Room. Have a great day.